Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 9th webinar in the Forestry Solutions series. This evening, we're looking at group certification in Ireland. I'd like to introduce you to the chairman for this evening, Mr. John Sherlock from the North Eastern Forestry Group. Thank you, John.
Good evening. How are we all doing? Thanks very much for coming to this webinar. I'm delighted to be chairing it. We have two, what would you say, sorry. We would have two giants, I suppose, of the certification with us tonight. We have Andy Grundy from the Soil Association in the UK, which is going to speak about the requirements for certification in timber. And the Soil Association does audits on behalf of the two certification bodies, so I'm very interested in that. And we also have Henry Phillips. Henry's a forestry consultant from Sligo, and he recently did a review of certification in Ireland going forward. So I'm very interested to hear Henry's what we hopefully tell us where we need to go. And I'm actually a member of the North East Forestry Group, who are a certification group in Ireland of private forest owners. So the first person I'd like to introduce is Andy. So Andy's going to give us a chat there, and we'll have questions and answers when it's over. So now, Andy, if you can maybe perhaps join us. Thank you.
Hi, John. I'm ready to jump in if it'll let me. The host has stopped my video, it's saying to me, so you can't see me at the moment. Here we go. Thanks. Good evening, everybody. Let me share my presentation. I'll get on and talk to you all about the role we have in certification and certification more generally. So yeah, I'm Andy. I'm a senior certification manager for Soil Association's certification business. It's Forestry department. We're based in Bristol. We're an environmental non-governmental organisation with a wholly owned trading subsidiary. So essentially, we're a not-for-profit with a wholly owned company within it, which delivers the certification to lots of organic and agricultural schemes, but a forestry department, which makes up about 30 or 40% of the certification business. So we, as John said, we're accredited by FSC and PEFC to deliver their forest management and chain of custody certification. So we're a certification body. We operate in 66 countries around the world. We've got over 4,000 clients. And we were founder members of the FSC back in 1995 or 6, I think. I've worked for the Soil Association for about 8 years. Previously, I've run a forest management group scheme and a chain of custody group scheme prior to kind of going from poacher to gamekeeper, I kind of think. So yeah, we work all over the world. We certify something like 27 million hectares of forest around the world. And we certify most of the forest area in the UK and Ireland. We're also audit kind of timber legality, so we work with the Timber Trade Federation in the UK, auditing their clients for the UK and EU timber regulations. And we also do validation and verification of carbon sequestration by new woodlands through the UK Woodland Carbon Code, and also restoration of peatlands through the Peatland Code. And we're looking to expand that carbon work outside of the UK as soon as possible. But tonight, I'm going to talk to you about the structure of FSC, particularly. PFC is very similar, but I'll focus on FSC for a short time. I'll talk about the principles and criteria. That's the kind of core part of what makes the forest management standards and what defines what sustainable forest management looks like. I'll give you a bit of an update on the national standard development processes in Ireland. We've got new FSC and PEFC standards in development at the moment. And then I'll just say a few things, a few kind of pointers, kind of top tips, if you like, for group schemes and establishing those. A lot of the clients we work with our group schemes, so that's when a number of forest owners can come together or be managed together as a group. It reduces the cost of certification and allows owners to kind of have afford by working together to have expertise to kind of guide the certification. And then I'll do a little mention of chain of custody, basically how that works in terms of procedures and claims, and a little bit of updates as well. So the first FSC came out in 1994, and it's all about a kind of common standard that can be applied globally. So they're very generic. They've gone through a number of revisions, and we're on version 5.2 at the moment. So they're kind of rules of what is environmentally appropriate, socially beneficial, and economically viable forest management. So that's a kind of key part of it, is these three chambers of environmental, social, and economic. And the individual principles take run through in a minute, and the individual criteria are the things that must be met to kind of define that sustainable forest management. As auditors, we look for the means of verification to kind of prove those criteria being met, and they're the foundations of the whole scheme, or both schemes. It applies to forests, obviously of all types, natural, plantations, and other. But other kind of habitats within the forest complex are included. Say, bits of open ground, various kinds, be it bog or rocky outcrops or meadows and wetlands, can all be included within the certified area. And the principles and criteria cover timber production, very obviously, but also, the other ecosystem services produced, and potentially non-timber forest products. So, things like rubber, for example, and Brazil nuts and other things often covered by certification too. Well, there's not a huge amount of opportunity for that in areas. These principles are independent of spatial scale and intensity. So if you're in certification, your forest is a certified management unit, which is the terminology for it, you have to comply with all of those principles and criteria. But the way of achieving that can vary according to scale. So the expectations of a smaller forest owner in terms of how they prove they comply are less burdensome than those that might be applied to a larger organisation like State Forest. So the scale, intensity, and risk is another FSC phrase about how you kind of the kind of mechanism you use to define those means of verification and how they vary. So the scale of the management, the intensity of the management, and the risk of that management causing kind of unwanted outcomes for the environment. So what does it matter? The thrust of it is to maintain the health and vitality of forest ecosystems and to protect particularly ecologically important forest areas, recognise the role that forests play in rural development and supporting employment in rural areas, protecting the long-term well-being of forest communities, and safe working conditions for workers, and preventing illegal logging. So the principles and criteria, they don't insist on perfection. It's not like a black and white, you get one thing wrong, you're out kind of situation. It's about guiding continuous improvement. And so the audits are looking at how the extent to which management satisfies the criteria. And if you fail to meet the criteria and you're not managed, the forest isn't being managed well enough, there's a range of different findings that can be applied by an auditor at an audit. And you have observations which are potential so if you don't do something about it, you'll end up being non-compliant with the standards. Minor findings, which is something isn't too serious, or one-off mistake, or something fundamentally minor, and you get kind of 12 months to sort that out, and it'll be addressed in the next audit. And then you get major issues where there's major non-compliance with standards, or major issues like illegal felling or severe pollution, something like that. And that grades the severity, and you're allowed a certain amount of those. And certificates are only suspended when you've got if you've got more than 5 major corrective actions at an audit, or you fail to close out one of those major findings by carrying out remedial action. So the principles, there's 10 overall principles, and within them 70 criteria that define this, and they cover lots of different areas: legal compliance, workers' rights, all sorts of others. I won't read them all out there, but around covering the 3 kind of chamber areas of economic, social, and environmental. So each of these indicators that exist within the standards should show the means of verification. So they'll outline how to audit those are defined. So if an indicator, this example indicator is that timber sales documentation can prove that all timber can be traced back to the forest of origin. The way you verify that is by looking at contract documents, delivery notes, all these invoices, and making sure it all connects up. And the same thing applies to all of the different criteria. So yeah, the basic of principle, criteria, means indicator, means of verification. And there's different terminology that's really important in this as well. You know, a shall is an absolute rule that you have to follow. A should is something that, you know, potentially gives a range of possibilities for describe something as a range of possibilities that might be a way of complying with standards. And there's may is things you can do, and then there's can is things that are possible you could be doing. So you know, shalls are your biggies. So both FSC and PFC have kind of online repositories of all their standards and documentation. And if you're particularly bored of an evening, you can have a wade through there. There's lots and lots of documentation. And you can kind of find out the history of standards and all of the different standards for forest management, chain of custody, and standards on how to make standards and everything else is in there. Bit of an update now on the standard development processes in Ireland. Soil Association are kind of managing or overseeing the FSC International Standard Development at the moment in Ireland. It's an interim standard because the idea is, the hope of FSC is that all countries with certification will develop their own standards internally, but where they haven't been able to do that, interim national standards can be developed by certification bodies. That's what we're doing, using a shortened process called the generic forest stewardship standard process. So lots of terminology here, but essentially there's a generic standard, so a version of those principles and criteria. It's adapted a bit for the Irish scenario, and we run a consultation on it, which some of you may have been aware of or contributed to, and that ran during November into December, and then some storms, so we extended it to January, give people a better chance to respond. Those results of that have been incorporated into a final draft of the Irish standard at the moment by Vanessa Bimforth, who's a consultant that we've engaged to do it. She's got lots of experience national standards around the world. And that final draft, we're hoping to have a second consultation on it, and we're haggling with FSC International at the minute about them financing that. So I can't confirm that for now. But we hope, you know, that will then be, once a final draft is completed, probably, you know, late spring, early summer, that'll be submitted to FSC International for assessment. And how long it takes them to get that signed off can vary quite a lot. But I would be hoping to have an Irish FSC standard in place before the end of the year. And PFC, again, is quite close to conclusion. They're on a final draft. I think there's a few nuggety issues that are being debated within their standard development process at the moment, but I think they're finding a mechanism to get through to conclusion and find compromises for the issues. So again, I think we're likely to have a PFC Irish standard probably before the FSC by the middle of the year, I would expect. So group schemes, I just wanted to talk a little bit about this. So I mentioned before that it's a mechanism to reduce the costs of certification for individual members. So essentially you have a group manager. Often these are forest management companies, most often they're forest management companies, but it could be a cooperative of forest owners or something like that. And they take responsibility for managing the group as a whole. And the savings are made because we have a kind of sampling, which is basically the square root of the number of members times the factor, depending on how big the forest tends to be. And so a sample of the members will be visited at each annual audit, and that'll just get rotated around. There's no requirement necessarily to visit them all over any set period, but it obviously reduces the cost of individual members. which sites are visited. It can be random, and but equally, if problems were highlighted at a certain site or stakeholders have complained about a site or something, that might attract the auditor's attention and get them to choose that one. But essentially, it's the group manager who is audited, or their management of the group. So the group manager, it's a very critical role, and it really needs someone with the skills to do it and the time to put into it. And they will carry out an internal audit program. So they'll be expected to audit a significant portion of the members each year to ensure they're all individually compliant. And then when we come along as the external auditor, we audit the group manager and how they have audited the members. And then we go and visit a few of the members as well. So it's the commonest way that private forests are certified. And, most UK private forestry group schemes now, if not all, actually, I think the only own ones now are organisational ones, like the Woodland Trust and the Crown Estate and things. We've got group schemes around the world. There's some big ones in Portugal where lots of small owners. That's the most similar situation to Ireland that I know of is in Portugal. There's a lot of farmers with small blocks of cork oak or eucalyptus or poplar, and they're grouped together in cooperatives that are kind of usually managed by, in that situation, the big processors driven it because they want the timber essentially. And they've kind of helped get the process going, but they're also kind of we've got groups in Portugal with over 1,000 members, and obviously the economies of scale there work really well for the small members, but they have to kind of give up a little bit of the kind of management of their forests so that they're under the control of the central organisation to make sure everyone follows the standards well. Because we have lots of small members wanting to do it their way. The control of the system gets a bit difficult. There was a Forest Service pilot in Ireland a few years ago, and that developed a set of group management procedures and templates, which are available. I'm not sure exactly where, but it was funded, and I believe the ITGA be able to know where those procedures in place are. So if a group you want to set up, you can get a kind of toolkit out of that. Lastly, chain of custody. Oh, slightly over my 15 minutes, but only another minute or so. So chain of custody, that's the timber leaving the forest, heading off to the processor, and then on to the secondary processor, they're eventually ending up as a toilet roll or a sheet of OSB or a plank of wood in the builder's merchant. And what a chain of custody, key element of chain of custody is a set of procedures which defines a quality management system, which is all about how the chain of custody will be controlled, so you know where the wood's come from and where it's going and how it's identifiable all the way through the process. And at the there's a lot more complexity to it, and uncertified and certified material can be mixed together in some instances, and that comes out with a range of claims that can be put on the material. Either FSC 100%, it's all come from certified forests, FSC mix 70, which is at least 70% of material has come from certified forests, and FSC controlled wood, which is the other element in an FSC mix claim, the 30% of uncertified material. But that has to go under an assessment, a due diligence assessment, which to prove that it's not come from any controversial or illegal sources. PFC chain of custody has very similar requirements. They've both put out new standards this year, and they're very closely aligned. There's not a great deal of difference between them as schemes. FSC, I've seen on the forest management side some rules, particularly around pesticides and things, whereas the PFC tend to lean on whatever the national legal requirements are, but they're not as different as some people think. Latest news on chain of custody, there's been some annual accreditation fee increases. Basically, FSC have put the price up. They put in a new system of sliding scale for companies. And the International Labour Organization requirements have been introduced as well. So companies have to demonstrate that they're not using slave labour and they're allowing unions to form and the like. But no, these are particularly important in European context. And harvesting contractors now have to be managed as outsourcers, which adds another bit of a bit more bureaucracy to the system, to be honest, and is not particularly beneficial in our situation. And PFC chain of custody has got a new standard, and I'll make sure this presentation's handed over to the IFO, and you can follow some of these links if you find out more about that. That deadline ends then. And I think that's me, a bit of a rattle through. I hope I haven't gone too far over, Alex and John. And thanks very much for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions, pop them in the Q&A, and I'll try and type in answers as we go. I think we might have some time for it later on. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Andy. Are we back online here? Yeah, thanks very much, Andy. That was very interesting. Start my video. Yeah, that was very interesting, Andy. I know there's a lot of detail in it, but it's not as onerous as people think, believe you me, especially when you have somebody like Andy helping you along the way. Next, we're going to have Henry. So Henry did a review of certification in Ireland, and he's going to share with us now where he sees certification, private forest certification going in Ireland. So now we'll have Henry coming on now, if you're there, Henry. Thanks, Henry.
I've gone a little bit ahead of myself. My name is Henry Phillips, and I'm a forestry consultant, and I specialize in forest economics, forest valuation, forest growth and yield. And I spent the last 20, 30 years mainly in Eastern Europe, but more recently I've come back to home. And in around April last year, the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine went to tender for somebody to do a study on private forest certification in Ireland. And together with Forestry Services, that's Paddy Bruton in Kilkenny, with Maria Conway, who's the Western Forestry Co-op in Sligo, and with Euroforest Ireland Limited, we won the tender. So I just basically brought the bits and pieces of the report together. So the report, as I say, was funded by the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, and it gave us 4 tasks. One was to describe the current status of forest certification in Ireland and Europe. And then to look at market access, including impact on current and future supply and various scheme requirements and so on. The third task was to have a look at certification schemes and models across Europe with a view to seeing what could be brought into Ireland. And finally, it was to develop a proposal to expand certification in the private forest sector in Ireland, including a model suited to Irish needs and incorporating the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine Forest Management Plan and use of information technology. For people who mightn't know, going back now to 2012, 2013, there was a COFORD, that's the COFORD working group set up on forest management planning. And they developed this model for forest management plans, which will be compliant with certification. At that time, we were promised that it would be introduced, but between the hoops and the reels and everything, it's not here yet. But that's why it's included in here, because it forms an integral part of the overall solution. If we look at the private sector in Ireland, and what we have here is in red is the private grant aided area. And this is the powerhouse of volume coming to market. This is where all the productive forest is in terms of spruce and so on, which accounts for around 90% of the volume coming to market in Ireland. And there's around 275,000 hectares of this stuff. And of it, only 15,680 hectares were certified as of December 2021, which is a very, very small percentage. And that is spread across a number of entities. One is Arbor Forest Management, Irish Forestry Unit Trust, 6590, Forestry Services, which is dual certification, the pilot project, which is FSC, VION, which is PEFC, and so on. Now, not included there, but included under certification are the farm partnerships covered under the Creature certification. And those farm partnerships would account for somewhere between 10 and 11,000 hectares. Within the EU, 55% of the forest area is certified. 94% is PEFC and 37% FSC. So as part of what we did a survey, and we got responses from 160 private forest owners, which is a fair sample, 4 forest owners associations, 3 certified groups, 4 forest advisors, and 7 forest management companies. So it is a widely representative sample.
Sorry to put it in, Henry. Your slides aren't changing on the screen. I think people are struggling. We're still stuck on the first one.
Okay. It says here I'm screen sharing.
Yeah, but we're still on the first.
If you could hit the top left button from beginning, and then we can actually see the slides as you're going down through them.
Which top left button now? Sorry.
Top left. Sorry, Henry. On the top left button from the beginning, just on your actual PowerPoint presentation on your own screen. And there's a button there under the red button with file on it. There's from beginning. So,
okay.
Yeah, that's perfect. We can see even just that is grand.
You happy now?
Yeah, that's grand. And if you can just press down through them as you're going through them, we can see them as well.
Okay. So there was 4 tasks in this certification study, which was funded by the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine. One is to describe the current status of forest certification. The second was to do a bit on market access. The third was to look at forest certification schemes and models across Europe and so on. And the final one was to develop a proposal to expand certification in the private forest sector. Now, in Ireland at the moment, as of December 2021, there was only 15,680 hectares in the private sector certified. That's out of a total of 275,000 of the private grant-aided area. And that's the area that basically supplies timber into the market. That's the stuff that's been planted since about 1970, 78 or thereabouts. In that, there's a number of group schemes. You have the pilot project, which is a group scheme. And then you have Forestry Services, which is a group scheme. You have individual certificates like the Irish Forestry Unit Trust with 6,590 and VION more recently with 4,063 hectares. Under Creature's certification come the forest farm partnerships, which account for about 11,000 hectares. Within the EU, 55% of the forest area is certified, 94% to PEFC and 37% to FSC. As part of the study, we did 2 surveys. One was a survey of private owners and the other was a survey within the processing sector. So within the forest growing sector, we got responses from 160 private forest owners, 4 forest owners associations, 3 certified groups, 4 advisors, and 7 forest management companies. So it represents a really significant and representative sample. And the main findings were that less than half, only 44% of forest owners were aware of forest certification. Only 36%, or a little more than a third, were aware of group schemes. And only 8% of owners claimed any sort of knowledge of certification costs. However, the majority of owners, over 60%, believe that certification will be necessary to sell timber into the future. And the majority of owners stated that the state should pay for certification. When we asked them what are the main barriers to forest management certification at present, and the scale here is in terms of importance. The most important people believe was financial, that it would cost too much. The second was the administration burden in terms of record keeping and so on. And the third was lack of knowledge. So we have financial, administration, and lack of knowledge. And if we're talking about solutions, then the solution must tackle these three things. It must tackle financial, administration, and the lack of knowledge. When we talked to the processing sector, we asked them, like, where are you selling your products into? And 90% are selling into the Irish market, 80% are selling into the UK market, and then a small percentage of others are selling into the UK and other markets. So the majority of stuff is going to the Irish and the UK market. So for certification, this is the main criteria that has to be met. When we asked them what was the most important factor in deciding to secure certification, they said it was market demand. So this is a market-driven, market-led initiative, certification. And the second most important thing was specific customer requests. So the market is demanding it and customers are demanding it. When we asked them what type of certification did they have in terms of chain of custody, 80% had FSC, and then there was about 20% who had dual custody, both FSC and PEFC. When we asked them what are the benefits that certification delivers to their processing business, the most important was increased sales and environmental social governance issues in and around ESG, what's there at the moment. And the third most one was most inquiries from customers. So it's in sales, it's governance, and inquiries from customers. 40% of the processors indicated that a lack of certified material has been an issue in the last year. That's in 2021. 64% of them import roundwood as part of their raw materials supply. And of that roundwood, more than 90% is certified. Something appears to have gone astray on my screen here, yeah?
Sorry, Henry, there, the slides aren't moving on there, so they're not, I'm afraid.
Are we back on track there now, Henry?
I'm not, no.
Hang on now. Am I on the right slide there?
Keep going.
Hang on now, we're at the start.
Do you want to keep going, Alex, there? And I'll just talk as the slide comes up.
Yeah, that's grand.
Yeah. Yeah, just hold it there. So 90% stated that a lack of certification, this is the processors, will be an issue in purchasing timber in the future. And 80% indicated that if certified output does not increase within 2 years, that's between 2022 and 2023, then this will negatively impact on their growth ambitions. And again, and the threshold limits, this is what Andy talked about, the 70% of certified timber material forms part of their monthly key production indicators for 30% of the companies. But most companies say that this will be included in their key performance indicators in the coming year. So we've gone to the next slide. What I did was, as part of my remit, I bring together the Roundwood All Ireland forecast, both for the North and South. And so I have access to all the various bits of that forecast, like the Quilcha forecast, the forecast for the Irish Forest Unit Trust, the forecast for Davies Forest portfolio, and so on and so on. So I brought it all together, and I was able to tease out all the private sector stuff. And based on the 70% threshold, we can see here in red, this is the shortfall. This is the material that has to be certified in order that the private sector has this 70% certified material. And over the period of forecast, which is 2021 to 2040, 24.6 million cubic meters will have to be certified if this threshold has to be met. And as we see in 2022, it's a shortfall of around 220,000 cubic meters. And then it jumps up to over 500,000 in 2023 and just keeps on going up and up and up. So the train is coming down the track, and it's coming down the track at an alarming rate of knots. So if you can click the next slide, please, Alex. Yeah. So Andy talked about group schemes, and when we were looking at certification, we looked at group schemes, and one of the things that came across to us is that initially there was a lot of group schemes in different countries across Europe, but over time these group schemes tended to amalgamate and tends to get bigger, because for certification you need scale. So in the UK at the moment, the first 4 or 5 group schemes would account for about 90% of the certified area. And you can see them here, like Till Hill, 205,000 hectares, Scottish Woodlands, 96,000 hectares. And if you can remember back to the slide we did on Ireland, like the biggest one we had was down here around 6,000 hectares. So you can see the difference between the two. Scale is so important in group schemes. And in the UK, 44% of the area is certified, with 60% certified in Scotland and 24% in the UK. The trend in PEFC in Europe is that you have only one certificate, but for a very, very large area. And generally, this group is run by an impartial body, often a national entity, PEFC. And if you click again, so this is a German scheme, and you can see there is a German assembly, and there's a German Forest Certification Council, and there's a PEFC entity. And below that sort of national level thing, there is large regional group schemes, and they interact with participating forest owner associations and forest owners. So this is sort of the trend within group schemes, that they're getting bigger and bigger, and either regionally based, or in the case then, if you click again, Alex, in Austria, where there's only one forest certificate, but it accounts for 80%, 85% of the forest area. You know, so it's a massive sort of scheme. So when we looked at a possible solution, there's only sort of 3 basic possibilities. One is to look at single certificates, which would be each individual private owner having their own certificate. And that's a non-runner, absolutely, for cost and so on, and for the burden of record keeping and everything else. We looked on building on existing group schemes, and now there's only 2 or 3 group schemes in the country, but we felt that wasn't quite appropriate. Which one do you pick? And if you pick it, are you accused of in favor and so on and stuff like that? And a lot of the group schemes, they're only in their infancy. They haven't developed any sort of real momentum or any impetus. And then we looked at developing a regional based schemes, like the regional based scheme that we showed you there for Germany and stuff like that. And when we were thinking about this, we were looking at what's coming down the track. Within 2 years' time, things have to happen. And we thought, if you're going to set up regional based schemes, you're going to put an awful lot of effort into setting them up. And really, finally, we came to the conclusion, if you click there, Alex, that the only viable option is a national group scheme that covers all of the country. If it's a national group scheme, it will give you this economy of scale, which is important. We don't want forest owners to be paying massive amount of money for certification. What we want is something where there is scale and where the cost to the owner is reasonable. So what we proposed was that there would be an Irish Group Forest Certification Scheme Limited, this entity, this national entity, which would oversee this national group scheme. And in this next diagram, if people can follow it, in the center here is this Irish Forest Group Certification Scheme. And above it is a steering group, which gives it guidance and direction. In that steering group, there is representation from forest owners, from forest companies, from the processing sector and from the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, and from the Forest Service. This group entity would have a group administrator who initially, be it he or she, would have to be a forest auditor to do internal audits and so on. And initially we thought about setting up maybe 2 or 3 group representatives, but these would be on a part-time basis initially until we have scale and until we have momentum. But a big thing in this is secretariat and IT support. What we want to do is reduce the burden of administration on forest owners. So what the Forest Service has to do over here on the right-hand side is to support this setup through funding and through having the forest management planning process online. The forest management plan is the single most expensive thing a forest owner has to do. And what we want is for all of this to be done online in a simple manner that basically uses technology to its best. To fund all this, we proposed that there is a levy payable on every cubic meter that goes into a processing plant. The grower pays a levy and the processor pays a levy. And unofficially, talking to people within the processing sector, they're quite happy. Well, won't say quite happy, but they are prepared to pay a levy as well. And I think this is very ominous in that it recognizes that the problem is not just the growing sector problem, it's not just the processing sector, it's all our problem, both the growing and the processing sector. And it can only be resolved through both coming together. So this group certification scheme, it would have its own website, it would provide certification templates, training, awareness raising, it would do internal audits, it would arrange for external audits for the group, and it would liaise and communicate and interact with certification bodies and so on. You move on there. So if this has all come to pass, the next step there is that the report that we produced has to form the basis of an industry-led development group on the need and time frame for the certification of private forests. It has to be across the whole forest sector. And there has to be this discussion and there has to be this agreement. Based on that, the development of a detailed business plan to address the final agreed solution. What we're saying is this is our solution. And we've thought about it hard. We don't think the final solution will be that much different, but the final solution has to be agreed within the sector itself, if it's to have ownership and if it's to have any chance of survival. Third thing is the establishment of the Irish Group Forest Certification Scheme or similar entity. You can call it whatever you like, give it whatever initials, but there has to be this overarching body, which is, it's non-profit, but it will be a lean commercial entity. There'll be no fat on this body whatsoever, but it won't be there to make money. It'll be there for the certification, but it will be absolutely efficient in how it goes about its business. And then what we need is the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine to finalize the development of and implement the forest management planning module in its IFRS information system by the end of 22. As I mentioned in the beginning, this was talked about in 2012. So we're 10 years on, and surely it's not beyond the realms of possibility that it could be done by the end of 2022. And finally, the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine should secure funding for compliant FMPs and the training of professional foresters for their preparation. So what we're trying to say is that in the beginning, the Forest Service would fund this national entity for the first 2 or 3 years until it gets up to scale. But it should also fund the preparation of compliant forest management plans and provide training for same. So that's what we came up with in our study. And thank you very much, and apologize for the technical glitches that we had along the way, but I hope it didn't interfere too much with your understanding. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Henry. Very insightful analysis of the certification moving forward. A lot of what you said there, I think everybody in Ireland is, everybody within the industry is quite aware, but I have a feeling somebody just doesn't want to grab the nettle, as they say. So last of all, I'm just going to go through here. I'm going to share screen. I'm a member of the North East Forestry Group, and we have and I'm just going to get it here. Sorry, I'm just going to share. Sorry. Now. Yep. Now, thanks very much to Evelyn there. You can probably see who's the genius in this operation. It's actually my wife, so it is. But anyway, this is just a quick chat about our group certification scheme. So basically, our North East Forestry Group, we have 100 members. Back in, I actually can't remember, but it was at least 5 years ago, we came up with this idea of running a pilot project to investigate the possibility of running a forest owner group certified scheme within Ireland. So we went to the Forest Service and looked for funding. And we obviously had spoken to the like of Andy there. Andy was great help with the Soil Association as regards auditing. We spoke to William Merivale there in PEFC Ireland. So we got a good bit of stuff together and we went to the Forest Service. The Forest Service were very receptive, I have to say, very, very receptive, and they saw it as something that was worthwhile. They gave us the funding, and the funding was for development of a website, was to educate and train us, and to pay for the forest certification audit for 5 and cert for 5 years. So we actually went ahead, and it was a fair task now for 12 of us. If you can imagine, we're 12 forest owners who are first generation forest owners. You can imagine our knowledge was very, very limited. So it was a very, very steep learning curve for us. But we muddled through, I have to say, and the enthusiasm showed by the 12 was unbelievable, because at the thought we thought this is going to be a hard slog for the guys, but they showed enthusiasm, and we worked continuously with the consultants for a year, and then we got our cert, so we did, and we looked at moving forward. Unfortunately, the DAFM, in their wisdom, decided that they could no longer support us to expand from the 12 members. They could no longer support us to pay for our audit fees, and they could no longer support us for paying for a group manager. So that left us 12 months further on with a cert, with all this learning, and nowhere to go with it. So we're quite a stubborn group in our own way. So we decided we weren't going to lose the cert just for the sake of lack of funding from the department. So the 12 members negotiated the costs with Andy Grundy, again from the Soil Association. We got a pro bono work done from a forester who had actually done the original forest management plans. And we went through the second audit, and we were successful in maintaining our cert, and there was a level of enthusiasm. And one of the criteria I see from group certification, and one of the things that's essential, is continuous learning. Now, and that's something that actually cropped up through achieving our forest certification. So our 12, as we call them, the 12 apostles, as we call them, and I'm actually one of them, believe it or not. But anyway, I don't know whether I'm Judas or not, but anyway, we did a lot of self-training. We did a forestry centered first aid course. We did chainsaw training. We've done several knowledge transfer group training. We've done, some of us actually have gone actually further with our forests and applied, and were successful in going the route of continuous cover. So the actual learning process in getting certified was in itself was a huge advantage, apart from the fact from the actual certification. So the third year and fourth year came on, and yet again, 12 of us with limited financial funds for certification were left standing out in the cold. We came to a commercial arrangement with a sawmill for the last 2 years, and we maintained our cert. The only problem with living like this is you're living on hand to mouth. You don't have the resources, the time, or the financial ability to expand the scheme, which is a shame, because you have this nucleus of learning from basic uneducated forest owners, I'd call ourselves, and we're there to share it, but we can't share it because we haven't got the ability to expand it. So we looked at why we couldn't expand. Well, we had no funding for a start. The DAFM, in their wisdom, said, no, we don't see the DAFM funding the expansion of private forest owners groups. There's already commercial entities offering certification. Why should they? And the sawmilling industry, with the exception of one, had a distinct lack of enthusiasm for moving on from the project. So we were actually lucky that we got one sawmill to help us in our moment of need. So you can obviously realize that we've been very, very price sensitive, I'd say, on how we were going to continue being certified. And we looked at what we saw the actual costs for a group, be it large or small. And one of the initial cost for somebody who wants to get their forest certified, if I went to Paddy Smith down the road and said, or if he came to me and said, you want to get certified, I'd say, well, you have to get a forest management plan to certification standard. So I've spoken to the person who did our 12 forest management plans. And she said with the amount of work that was there, it would take in the region of around about €1,200 per plan. Now, that's a lot of money for a forest owner, bearing in mind that the average size of the forest owner plot in Ireland is 8 hectares. And that's including hardwoods and softwoods. And within our 12 members, originally with the pilot scheme, we wanted to go for a broad spectrum of all forest owners. So we have some forest owners who have large areas of softwood and some forest owners who have small areas of hardwood. So you can imagine how that stands if you wanted to enter as a certification, get certified. So originally, as Henry had said, the DAFM had said a number of years ago that they were going to subsidize those members who want to get certified with the additional cost of a certification forest management plan. That hasn't happened. Anyway, group manager. The group manager's role is vitally important, as Andy and Henry have said, because the group manager, in a way, is like a man on a stagecoach who's driving the horses. He knows where they want to go, but it's just to keep them in line is the main thing. They want to go, but sometimes they might just want to go where he wants them to go. So that's, I see, the role of a group manager. He manages their actions, he manages their data, he advises them on our forestry operations. He sees that what they're doing is doing right, and he coordinates all their activities. He also collects the data, he gets them to have all the correct paperwork, which I see as another thing, another fantastic result of our project is that we all became aware of our responsibilities as regards paperwork, because there is somewhat of a lackadaisical attitude sometimes of people doing forestry work, in that their paperwork tends to follow the work rather than precursor the work. So that's something we found. Data storage. Now, data storage I see as important, but I honest to God think that with modern systems, it wouldn't be beyond the ability, and I've spoken to a couple of computer geniuses, I'd call them, for a better word, And they reckon that the data storage could be a very simple one, is available off market for a small scale, but that could be modified for a larger scale, that would allow input by the forest owner and the group manager with easy access by the auditor. So that's something that isn't unachievable. Now, the other one is the inputting of forestry group members' activities. There's where I see what Henry was saying and what Andy was saying what would be vital, in that if we move towards a paperless activity, apart from having it on record on our own site for our own records, but a paperless trail would leave it very easy towards the inputting of all activities, however modest, into a central data and a central management plan, and our group management plan and our own forest management plan on a basis as it happens. And I think that's another key. The other costs I see is an annual inspection. So obviously the group manager, we would hope, along with keeping us in line and along with making sure that we were up to speed in what we would see would be at least once a year a training session, because as Andy and Henry show, the standards move on annually, our biodiversity requirements move on. So along with an annual inspection by our group manager, we'd need a training sessions. And then of course we have the annual audit, which is done by, we have had ours done by the Soil Association in the UK. And that sometimes is a visit to your plant. It depends on if it's your, I wouldn't say your turn, but you're looked at. They come out and they inspect your activities. And when you get into the system, it's not that difficult. Like forest owners like myself, when you know nothing about something, it seems very difficult. But when you learn a little and the tasks are made easy accessible, then it doesn't seem as difficult. The future. Now, this is my thoughts on the future. Henry has his, and Andy, I'm sure, has his. So this is my actual thoughts on it. Maybe it's not what everybody would agree. I think we need a national group certification scheme, like Henry said, but owned and controlled by private forest owner groups for private forest owners. So you'll notice I've underlined the three of them there, because there is already group certification schemes been ran by commercial companies. And as I say, there is room for everybody. We don't want to be the world domination in group certification scheme. We just want to have an alternative to the forest owners apart from the management companies. The management companies have a role and they do excellent work, I have to say. Sometimes they don't get great press, but they do excellent work. But at the same time, there are those of us, including myself, who tend to be a little bit of a control freak, and we like to be the masters of our own destiny, be it successful or downfall. We still like to be the masters. So I think a national group certification scheme, which would be owned by the forest owners, would be the way forward. Now, we need a certification standard forest management plan, and we need it funded by the DAFM. And they need to grab that nettle and grab it tight and say, right, lads, we're going to give you a forest management standard plan. We also need to train the private forest owners. And by training, I mean, we need to start fairly simple. And that's not been disingenuous to them. We need to start simple because we all have to learn why we need it, how we go about it, and how to run it on a continual basis. So it's not the end of the world. Now, it's the end of the world if you ask me to develop and to create a forest management plan, yes, but what the input by the forest owner is not huge. There is a bit of input, and he has a responsibility to keep it up to date as well. So in the training, I think a training scheme ran on a similar basis of the KTG would be something that the DAFM could also grab that nettle in certification and fund. And then again, education is a gift that's never lost, and it's always money well spent. And as Henry said, the sawmilling industry need to grab that nettle as well, because they're standing back at the minute because they don't want to absorb the cost of certification into their price structure. Now, at the minute, there's an awful lot of roundwood been imported from Scotland because Scotland has a disease-free status, so they can bring in round timber with bark. That's helping the sawmillers achieve their FSC 70%. I would wonder if Scotland wasn't able to export timber to Ireland, would the dilemma of uncertified timber availability or certified timber availability be more of a crisis? So at the minute, the sawmills, I think, are getting an easy ride on certification. Now, I think the sawmilling industry could support us without a huge expense, i.e., even if it was to such a thing as collecting a levy similar to what the meat factories do, and collect it for the IFA, collect it free of charge, and maybe put a percentage themselves towards that levy. So it would be an incremental basis of payment. And the last thing I think, well, these are only my thoughts, by the way. The last thing is we definitely would need some form of a premium for certified timber. Now, that sometimes is what we'd call a free market enterprise. And that's the way life is. But if we look at training private forest owners, getting certification standard forest management plans, well then, if we go to the bother of that, I'm damn sure that we need extra money for doing it, because that's the way it is. Now, I have a feeling what may happen is that if the overall uncertified timber overseeds demand, well then the price for uncertified timber will plummet. And that way, the sawmills then will be able to pay a premium for certified timber. And I was just listening to Henry's presentation there, and he gave us the forecast. So in the next 18 years, we're going to have a shortfall of 24 million cubic meters of certified timber. And that means that if we want to certify our forests to achieve that and satisfy that demand, that means we have to certify 1.3 million, now it's 1.36, I did a quick calculation, 1.3 million cubic meters of timber every year for the next 18 years. So if you think about it, at the moment, there is, oh, yes. At the moment, there is 12 private forest owners. There we are, happy and proud, getting our certs. That's the private forest owners. That's the future of private forest owner certification in Ireland looking at you. 12 forest owners from the Loudmead, with the Minister for Agriculture presenting us with us back when we got our certs. So here we are at a crossroads in certification in Ireland, and we have 12 forest owners from Meath holding the only private forest owner cert. There are group certifications in Ireland, and they're run by commercial entities. There was another one that was part of our pilot scheme from Cork. Unfortunately, they no longer decided to hold on to the cert. So we're there. So that's where we are with our certification scheme. The one thing I would say is we're not giving up on it. We're certainly intend holding on to our cert, but we'd like to see more than 12 of us in it. And if we got the ability, be it to expand our own club, because it's a legal entity, we call it a club, or join in a national group, I would see no problem in that. And I think it's where we need to go. Now, as Henry said, there's where we want to go. How we get there, I'm not sure. So that's me finished with my presentation. I think we'll go to questions there, Alex. So I'm going to stop sharing and we're going to go to questions. So we have great questions here.
Could we ask Andy and Henry to join us again, please?
Yeah. So.
Thank you.
I'm just looking at some of the questions. Could you outline the goals, length, and cost of a chainsaw course for a private forest owner? I think that's more for another day. Henry, we'll ask this one. Any insights on potential for more forest coverage in the Northeast? Or are landowners more incentivized for other land uses? I know it's not a certification question, but you're at the work coal face of forestry. What would your thoughts be on that?
Well, I was driven out of the Northeast, Shannon, 40 years ago.
I'm
out of touch with the Northeast, even though I was there on Sunday and Monday over around Louth and Mead.
Yeah.
So I'm not up to speed on
yeah.
the East. Yeah. If you talk about the West, I can talk about the West.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I suppose, well, I don't really have any other questions there. That there's chainsaw courses, and thanks. One question I'd ask, Andy, it's something that people have asked me in the past, is what do you consider, a brief synopsis, the advantages of PEFC over FSC or FSC over PEFC in an Irish situation where it's quite small and fragmented?
Well, I think certainly the big national schemes, the only ones I know of, kind of thing that Henry was describing as a possible solution for Ireland, I only know of that in the PEFC system. So like the examples quoted in Germany and Austria and France, it's the same, where they're kind of, they're equivalent of the local forest service officers kind of help manage the scheme and manage their local area, and it's like managed through the State Forest Service. They're the only ones I know of. Within FSC, it's pretty much all private forests are managed through private company or cooperative group schemes. Although, you know, obviously there are FSC certificates for the state-owned forest, and there are other examples like Wiltshire's farm partnerships where they do a bit of management of private forests. So I think PEFC has more experience as a scheme with those kind of big national groups. In terms of the rest of kind of the certification, I mentioned chemicals. FSC has a very strict chemical pesticide policy, whereas PEFC just aligns with whatever the national legislation is. So that's a key element. The standards fundamentally are kind of the same. They cover the same kind of areas. There's not a huge amount of variation. We've got new standards, about to come out for both. It'll be interesting when we get into the nitty gritty. It's only really when you go out and audit it, you really kind of realise the any differences that there are. So they're the main elements. I mean, FSC has a bit more oversight, so we incur a few more costs doing FSC. So we charge a little bit more to do to give an FSC certificate than a PEFC one. But most of the ones we do are dual. People get both. You can get both for a lot less than the cost of, 1 + 1 is only 1.5 rather than 2. If you see what I mean? There's an economies of scale with doing the two together.
Thanks. Henry, a question for you. In your conversations with the sawmills, when we were originally doing our pilot scheme, the sawmills pushed our funding mechanism towards the FSC because they reckoned that that's where the majority of the sales to the UK were. If forest owner groups decided to go for PEFC, did the sawmills say to you, would there be any impact on that, or would they regard that as certified timber?
They would regard it as certified timber, but obviously their main market is the UK. And in the survey, 80% of them export to the UK. So for them, in terms of chain of custody, the UK demands FSC more so than PEFC. So for them, FSC would be the favoured one, for want of a better word. It'd be the favoured child of the two that you have. But if you look at the volumes that are coming onto the Irish market over the next 20 years, I don't think it's going to be possible for the Irish processing sector to process that and put it all into the UK market. They're going to have to go onto mainland Europe. In mainland Europe, it's more PEFC than FSC. So in the short term, the answer to your question, I think, is FSC, but in the medium to longer term, it's PEFC. And the ultimate solution is what they have in the UK, which is this joint certification under the Aqua scheme or something similar, the joint scheme. And as Andy said, you don't get two for the price of one, but you get two for less than the price of 1 and 1.
The other, thanks very much, Henry.
Yeah.
Andy, the other price or question we were asked was, is there, apart from the actual administration of the certification scheme, is there a price differential or cost differential between PEFC and FSC as regards an audit and ongoing certification?
Yeah,
license?
I mean, that's what I was referring to, is the overall cost. I mean, we quote, like we have for yourselves in the North East Club there, we quote for the whole thing, basically. And I mean, the audit's the same. The main cost in the audit is getting an auditor to the forest site, and they have to go out and have a look at the forest, go to the office, check the paperwork, and that's the same with both. So, yeah. But
is the license, is the actual cert within the FSC and the PEFC, are they both, is both of the price aligned similar?
Oh, yeah, because I mean, there's our costs, and then you also pay the schemes. So you're paying FSC and you're paying PEFC, and they vary a little bit. FSC is a little bit more complex, as always, and they have a slightly different rate for natural forests to plantations. So I think within FSC it's 0.02 cents. A hectare off the top of my head, but you if you're under a certain size, you don't pay anything. So there's a cut off if you're under the SLIM threshold, which nearly all of the kind of farm or individual level forest owners would be. And PFC again have a rate per hectare, which I forget, but that's set nationally, so it varies nationally. You'd have to ask William. I don't have the figure in front of me. There's not a huge amount of difference. It's only when you got big hectares going in that big, once you're into the thousands of hectares, that it will become significant.
And the last question I see there is the two reviews of the two different standards for PEFC and FSC Ireland. We were asked, would they simplify the current standards more in line with Irish conditions? If you bear in mind that the average size is 8 hectares in Ireland, and if you look at what the FSC regard a small forest is 200 hectares and below. So there is sometimes we look at the cert and we thought maybe they're trying to drive a panel pin with a sledgehammer sometimes, as regards what they're trying to achieve,
I know what you're saying, and there's a lot of work has gone in over the years in different places on getting small forests into certification. And the UK has had a couple of attempts at creating kind of a simpler method for small forests, because one of Henry's slides actually said that the certified forest area in England is only 24%. That's because there's a massive amount of the forests in England are actually small farm woodlands, and that makes up over half of the forest area of England, which is totally different to Wales, which is mainly big conifer forests. And the reason they haven't come into certification because it's hard for small forests. But they also tend to be broad-leaved, and there isn't a ready processing sector for it. But there's been projects to try and do that, but they haven't got very far, because fundamentally the schemes say you have to comply with everything, however big you are. The only thing you can vary is how you prove that. So like a big company might need to have very complex records, whereas a small forest owner might just have some notes, handwritten notes in a diary, showing that they visited the site or they checked up on the harvester when he was working there, or whatever kind of thing it might be. It's just the way you prove it is different. And obviously what we can do as well, there's an allowance for desk audits. So we've done desk reviews with yourselves with that group. So where the certification runs on a 5-year cycle. So there's a main audit and then 4 surveillance audits, and we're allowed to hold 3 of those surveillance audits as a remote desk review, as long as there aren't any significant non-compliances. So obviously then we don't have to pay an auditor and send them out, so we quote significantly lower for those years. And that's, I mean, that's helps yourself to keep going.
Thanks. Have we time for one last question, Alex, or what we're on the clock?
Yeah, no problem.
Henry, another
Yeah.
question there we saw was, just hold on there now. Yeah, Henry, when you were doing your study, did you speak to the DAFM on their opinions on a national certification scheme for Ireland?
We did, yes.
Okay.
That's
So was it an omerta situation, was it?
well, I'll try and be very polite about this.
That's no problem to you, Henry. You can be very polite.
We reported to a working group which had DAFM representative, which was part of a steering group which had DAFM representative. We reported to the DAFM and we reported to COFORD. So under four guises, we discussed it with the DAFM. And I think the DAFM, in fairness to them, they are aware. Possibly the only viable solution is a national scheme. They talked about the commitment they had in the forestry program about training and funding for certification, but the pudding is in the eating, as you rightly know yourself. So we have to wait and see what happens this year. Nothing happens by the end of this year, then I think what we'll see is large chunks of volume, which private owners grow and have invested their time and their resources in. Large chunks of that will tend to go to less valuable end uses. And that will create a two-price tier structure within the market, like you have said, certified versus uncertified, and it'll be a rush to get the stuff into the sawmill. Yeah.
John, can I ask one quick question to Henry? Just because it's the nuts and bolts of this for a forest owner to kind of get going on certification, do you think the department are open to going ahead with facilitating the management plan on the IFR system? Oh, absolutely, yeah.
I was the one that drew up this original forest management plan, come back to and I spec'd it out for them.
Yes.
Unfortunately, when it goes into the department, it goes into an overall system. So if headage payment for sheep is more important than forest management plans, then the IT resource goes into headage payment for sheep. And that's what happened. But I believe what they're telling me, that they are absolutely committed to get that done, by the end of 2022.
That'd be a great step,
Absolutely, yeah.
Thanks, Henry.
How are we doing, Alex?
Yeah, I think that's all our questions answered that came in on email and everything else. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much to both Andy and Henry. I'm sure this is a conversation that won't end tonight, but at least if it's the start of a long journey, or if we're opening a gate into a large field of developments, I think it's been a start, and for me especially, it's great to hear, especially from you, Andy, because you're doing the actual audits, and especially from Henry, because you've been out there, knocking on doors, asking the hard questions, and thanks very much. I'd also like to thank the Society of Irish Forest Owners and for contributing. I'd like to thank the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine for their support in this series of webinars, because I do believe sometimes we give the DAFM bad press. Their hearts are in the right places, but it just takes a little bit of pushing along to keep them along. The other thing, Andy, you said there was there's a website. There is a website at the minute, groupcertification.ie. It has been fired back up. There is all the relevant stuff. It's very well put together, so it is, and you can actually download some of the forest management plans. So I'd like to thank you all for that. And Alex, yet again, has come, and our tech man in the background there, we can't see him. So thanks very much to everybody.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody.
Okay.
Cheers. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Good night,
Bye-bye.
everyone.